You know, silence is usually a peaceful thing, a moment to catch your breath or gather your thoughts. But in the boardroom of Sterling Holdings on a Tuesday morning, silence was the sound of a billion-dollar empire holding its breath as its queen fell from the throne. Victoria Sterling, a woman who could move markets with a single raised eyebrow, had been commanding the room just seconds before, her voice cutting through the air like polished steel. And then, nothing, just a terrifying, hollow gasp and the thud of a body hitting the floor that sounded louder than a gunshot. 7 executives sat there, frozen in their Italian leather chairs, their minds probably calculating stock drops and PR nightmares before they even thought about checking for a pulse. But Darnell Washington didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just moved. Darnell was the guy you walked past without seeing, the 38-year-old single dad in the gray uniform who knew which floor tiles were loose and which executives drank their coffee black. And in that moment, while the masters of the universe were paralyzed by shock, the invisible man became the only person in the room who mattered. He dropped his mop, the handle clattering against the marble like a dropped weapon, and he sprinted, his work boots squeaking on the polished floor, pushing past a wall of expensive cologne and stunned silence. "Call 911. He roared, and his voice wasn't the quiet, deferential tone he used when someone asked him to empty a bin. It was the command of a man who had seen life fade out before and wasn't about to let it happen again. He hit his knees beside her, and she was already turning that terrifying shade of gray-blue that haunts your nightmares, her eyes fixed on something nobody else could see. And Darnell, he didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see a boss. He saw a human being whose clock had just stopped ticking. He pressed his fingers to her neck, praying for a flutter, a thrum, anything. But there was nothing, just the terrifying stillness of a heart that had given up. "Come on," he whispered, his hands finding the center of her chest, interlocking his fingers. "Not today. You don't get to go today." And he started to push hard, fast, the rhythm of survival he'd learned in a free community center class years ago. Staying alive. Staying alive. Deep compressions that cracked the silence of the room. And then he did the thing that would ruin him. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and sealed his mouth over hers to breathe air into her starving lungs. And that's when the spell of shock broke for the executives, but not in the way you'd hope. "Get him off her," someone shrieked, a voice dripping with revulsion. And Darnell felt a blow to his back, sharp and stinging, like someone had kicked him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, because he was the only thing tethering Victoria Sterling to this earth. "She's not breathing." He shouted between compressions, sweat stinging his eyes, ignoring the hands grabbing at his uniform, ignoring the insults that were flying now. "Filthy animal." Disgusting, words that cut deeper than the physical blows, because they weren't about his actions. They were about his existence. He kept going. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe, until suddenly, violently, she gasped, a ragged, ugly sound that was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard, her body arching off the floor as the air rushed back in. He slumped back, his own chest heaving, watching the color flood back into her face, watching her eyelids flutter, and for a split second, he felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy, the kind of high you get when you cheat death. But then the world came crashing back in. The paramedics burst through the doors, swarming her, pushing him aside, and Richard Hartwell, the CFO, a man with silver hair and a heart made of ledger paper, loomed over Darnell like a dark cloud. "What is your name?" Richard demanded, not with gratitude, but with the tone of a man identifying a stain on his carpet. Darnell Washington," he stammered, trying to catch his breath. "I'm the janitor. You put your mouth on her," Richard hissed, his face twisted in disgust, as if Darnell had infected her rather than saved her. "You touched her. She was dead," Darnell said, his voice trembling now, the adrenaline fading into a cold dread. "I brought her back. Get out," Richard snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the door. "Leave the building immediately. We will review the footage. And if you know what's good for you, you won't come back." Darnell looked around the room, searching for one pair of eyes that held kindness, one person who would say good job, but they were all looking at Victoria, fawning over her, or looking at him with that same mixture of fear and disdain. So he picked up his bucket, his hands shaking so hard the water sloshed over the rim, and he walked out. The hero who was treated like a villain. That night was a long, dark tunnel for Darnell, sitting on the bus with his head against the cold window, watching the city blur past. A city that felt like it was designed to keep people like him on the outside looking in. He got home to the tiny apartment in South Side Chicago where the paint was peeling, and the draft came through the window frames. But it was home because Jasmine was there. Jasmine was 6, with eyes that saw too much and a heart that was too big for her chest. And when she ran to him, hugging his legs, asking why he was home early, he had to lie. He had to force a smile onto his face and say, "Just a crazy day, baby girl. Just a crazy day." Because how do you tell your daughter that her daddy saved a life and got treated like garbage? For it, he lay in bed that night, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of a country he'd never visit, listening to the sirens wail in the distance. And he replayed the moment over and over, the feeling of her ribs under his hands, the way life shuddered back into her, and he tried to tell himself he did the right thing, that God saw him even if the executives didn't. But comfort is hard to find when you know the rent is due in a week, and you probably just lost your paycheck. The next morning, the hammer dropped, and it dropped hard. Darnell showed up at the service entrance, lunch bag in hand, trying to hold onto a shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, once the panic settled, they would understand. But the security guard, a guy Darnell had shared coffee with a dozen times, wouldn't even look him in the eye. "Can't let you in, Darnell," the guard mumbled, staring at his boots. "Orders from up top. HR wants you to call them. Your locker's already been cleared out." It felt like a punch to the gut, winded and sick. Darnell stood there on the sidewalk while the morning rush hour flowed around him. People in suits marching toward their futures while his was being erased. He called HR from a payphone, his fingers fumbling with the coins, and the voice on the other end was robotic, scripted, telling him he was terminated for inappropriate conduct and violation of personal space protocols. Legal jargon for you touch the queen and you're a peasant. No severance, no reference, just a dial tone echoing in his ear like the final note of a sad song. And then the rumors started. Because bad news travels fast, but malicious gossip travels at the speed of light. Someone had leaked a still image from the security footage, a grainy, out-of-context shot of him leaning over her. And the internet, being the cesspool it can be, spun a narrative that was twisted and vile. Janitor assaults CEO, creep caught on tape, the kiss of death, and suddenly Darnell wasn't just unemployed. He was radioactive. He couldn't get a job interview. Cleaning services slammed doors in his face. Old friends stopped returning his calls. And the shame. The shame was a heavy coat he couldn't take off, weighing him down until he could barely get out of bed. He stopped eating so Jasmine could have seconds. He turned off the heat during the day to save pennies. And he watched his life disintegrate, brick by brick, while the woman he saved recovered in a private hospital suite that cost more per night than he had made in his entire life. But here's the thing about connection, about the energy that passes between two people when one pulls the other back from the abyss. It leaves a mark, a spiritual fingerprint that you can't scrub away with money or PR spin. Victoria Sterling woke up in her penthouse for nights later, gasping for air, her silk sheets tangled around her legs, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs because the nightmare was always the same. The darkness, the cold, the feeling of slipping away into nothingness. And then, the voice. It was a man's voice. Raspy, desperate, commanding. "Stay with me. Don't you dare go." And in the dream, she would reach for that voice like a lifeline, and it would pull her up into the light. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking out at the Chicago skyline glittering like a jewelry box, and she felt a hollowness in her chest that had nothing to do with her heart condition. She was alive. The doctors said it was a miracle, a spontaneous resuscitation. But Victoria didn't believe in miracles. She believed in facts. And the fact was that someone had been there. Her executives had been vague, shifty, telling her security handled it, or the situation was resolved. But Victoria Sterling didn't build an empire by accepting vague answers. She got up, poured herself a glass of water with trembling hands, and made a decision she was going to find out who pulled her back from the edge. Because she owed them a debt, and the Sterlings always paid their debts, she called her head of security at 4 a.m., her voice raspy but firm, demanding the raw footage from the boardroom. Not the edited clips, not the summary, the raw tape. She watched herself fall, a puppet with cut strings, and then she saw him, the blur of gray motion. The man with the mop, the way he abandoned everything to rush to her side. She watched him work, his face contorted with effort, sweat dripping from his brow, counting, breathing, fighting for her life, while her highly paid executives stood around like statues in expensive suits. And then she saw Richard Hartwell shove him. She saw the disgust on Richard's face. She saw the way Darnell. She zoomed in on his name tag. Darnell was escorted out, head bowed, shoulders slumped, carrying the weight of the hero who had been treated like a criminal. She paused the video on his face, zooming in until the pixels blurred, staring at the eyes of the man who had breathed life back into her. And she felt a crack in her armor, a fissure in the cold, hard shell she had built around herself for 20 years. Find him, she whispered to the empty room, picking up her phone again. Find Darnell Washington, and bring me everything. But by the time her team located him, it was almost too late, because poverty is a disease that moves fast, and despair is a complication that can kill you quicker than a heart attack. When Victoria pulled up to the crumbling apartment building in South Side, driving her own car for the first time in years, she felt like she was entering a foreign country, a place of cracked sidewalks and boarded-up windows, a place her company's policies had probably helped create by keeping wages low and rents high. She climbed the stairs, the smell of old cooking oil and damp plaster heavy in the air, and knocked on the door, her heart pounding harder than it had in the boardroom. A little girl opened it. Jasmine, looking small and scared in a t-shirt that was 2 sizes too big, clutching a teddy bear that had lost an eye. I'm looking for Darnell, Victoria said, her voice softer than she thought it could be. He's sleeping, Jasmine whispered, tears welling up in her big, dark eyes. He won't wake up. I tried to give him juice, but he just spills it. He's burning up, miss, please. Is he gonna go away like Mommy did? Victoria pushed past her gently, entering the dim apartment, and there he was, curled on a mattress on the floor, shivering under a thin blanket, his skin gray and clammy, his breathing shallow and rattling. He looked like a shadow of the man in the video, diminished, broken, dying of a fever brought on by stress and starvation and the sheer weight of a world that didn't care if he lived or died. She knelt beside him, ignoring the dust on her designer jeans, and took his hand. It was scorching hot, rough with calluses, the hand of a man who worked, a hand that had saved her life. Darnell, she whispered, squeezing his fingers. Darnell, can you hear me? It's Victoria. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, glassy and unfocused, and he looked at her with a confusion that broke her heart. Am I in trouble? He rasped, his voice barely a ghost of a sound. No, Victoria said, tears spilling over her cheeks, hot and fast. No, you are not in trouble. You are the furthest thing from trouble. She turned to Jasmine. Grab your bear, sweetheart, and grab your daddy's coat. We're leaving. Where are we going? Jasmine asked, trembling. We're going to get your daddy back, Victoria said, pulling out her phone and dialing the emergency line for the best private hospital in the city. We're going to fix this. The ambulance ride was a blur of lights and sirens. Victoria holding Darnell's hand the entire way, refusing to let go even when the paramedics tried to maneuver around her, whispering promises to him that she intended to keep or die trying. They got him into a private suite, hooked him up to fluids, antibiotics, monitors that beeped a reassuring rhythm, and Victoria sat in the chair in the corner, watching him sleep, watching the color slowly return to his face. And she realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about profit margins or quarterly goals. She was thinking about justice. She was thinking about the fact that she had almost let a good man die because she hadn't been paying attention, because she had let people like Richard Hartwell run her world. And she made a vow right there in that hospital room, watching Darnell's chest rise and fall. She was going to burn the old system down, and she was going to build something new from the ashes, When Darnell finally woke up, really woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows, and Jasmine was asleep in a cot next to his bed, and Victoria was sitting there, reading a file, looking like a guardian angel in a power suit. "You're awake," she said, closing the file and leaning forward, her eyes intense and clear. "Why?" Darnell asked, his voice stronger now, but still laced with confusion. "Why are you here?" They said I assaulted you." "They lied," Victoria said, her voice hard as diamond, "and I am going to make them pay for that lie." "Darnell, I saw the tape. I saw what you did. You didn't assault me. You gave me a second chance at life, and I wasted it by letting them crush you." She stood up and handed him a piece of paper, thick, creamy stationery with her letterhead at the top. "What is this?" he asked, his hands trembling slightly as he took it. "Read it." It was a public statement, already released to the press, a full exoneration, a detailed account of his heroism, and a formal apology from Sterling Holdings. But below that was something else, a contract. "I don't want my old job back," Darnell said quietly, looking up at her. "I can't go back to being invisible." "I don't want you to be invisible," Victoria said. "I fired Richard Hartwell this morning. Security escorted him out 20 minutes ago. His office is empty." Darnell's eyes widened. You fired the CFO?" "I fired the man who couldn't see the value of a human life," she corrected. "And I want you to take a new position, Darnell, Director of Employee Welfare. I want you to be the eyes and ears of the people I've been ignoring. I want you to tell me what needs to change, who needs help, who is struggling. I want you to make sure no one, ever again, feels the way you felt this week." Darnell looked at the contract, looked at the salary figure, which had more zeros than he had ever seen, looked at his sleeping daughter who was safe and warm, and then he looked at Victoria. And he saw it, he saw the change in her, the softening, the realization that she had been saved in more ways than one. "I don't know how to be an executive," Darnell said, a small smile touching his lips, "and I don't know how to be a human being sometimes." Victoria smiled back, tears standing in her eyes again. "Maybe we can teach each other." Darnell looked at the contract in his hands, the paper trembling slightly, not from weakness this time, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Director of Employee Welfare. It sounded like a made-up title, something corporate throws together to make themselves feel better. But looking into Victoria's eyes that were no longer the icy glaciers he'd seen on billboards, but warm, human, and pleading, he knew this was real. He knew she wasn't offering him a job. She was offering him a sword to fight the dragons he'd been hiding from his whole life. "I need to think," Darnell said, his voice raspy. This is a lot. I'm just a guy who knows how to fix a leaky faucet and buffer a floor. You're asking me to fix a culture. I'm asking you to bring your heart into a building that hasn't had one in 20 years. Victoria replied, sitting on the edge of the bed, invading the sterile space with her presence. "Take your time. But while you think, I need to show you something." She pulled out her phone and showed him a live feed. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment with hardwood floors, a kitchen island that gleamed, and a bedroom with a canopy bed that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. "That's your new temporary housing," she said. "The lease is paid for a year. It's 3 blocks from a magnet school for Jasmine. Your neighbor, Dorothy. I've arranged for a home health aide to visit her twice a week, on my dime. You don't have to go back to that cold apartment, Darnell." "Not ever." Darnell looked at the screen, then at Jasmine sleeping peacefully in the cot, and he felt the dam inside him finally break. The stoic mask he'd worn for years, the "I'm fine" armor he put on every morning, just shattered. He put his face in his hands and wept ugly, heaving sobs that shook the bed frame. Victoria didn't look away. She didn't offer a tissue or a platitude. She just reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, a steady, grounding weight, anchoring him while he let go of years of survival mode. 2 days later, Darnell walked out of the hospital, not into the cold wind of uncertainty, but into a waiting car. When he arrived at the new apartment, it was like stepping into a dream. Jasmine ran from room to room, screaming with delight, sliding in her socks on the wooden floors. "Daddy, I have a desk. I have a view of the park." But Darnell went straight to the window, looking out at the city. He wasn't looking down anymore. He was looking across. He pulled out the phone Victoria had given him, a sleek new device, and texted her 3 words, "I'm in." The first day Darnell walked back into Sterling Holdings, the atmosphere was so tense you could snap it like a dry twig. He wasn't wearing his gray uniform. He was wearing a navy blue suit that Victoria had sent a tailor to fit him for. He walked through the lobby, past the spot where he had almost lost everything, and heads turned. Whispers rippled through the air like a breeze in a wheat field. "Is that him? The janitor? I heard he's sitting in Hartwell's office." He took the elevator up, not the service elevator, but the glass one, watching the lobby shrink beneath his feet. When the doors opened on the executive floor, Victoria was waiting. She looked nervous, which was a look that didn't fit her face, but it made her real, ready. She asked, "No," he admitted, straightening his tie. "But let's do it anyway." They walked into the boardroom, the same room where she had died and he had been vilified. The remaining executives were there, looking like kids who had been caught stealing cookies. They wouldn't meet his eyes. Darnell didn't sit at the foot of the table. He walked to the front, standing next to Victoria. "This is Darnell Washington," Victoria announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. "He is the new director of employee welfare. His word carries my authority. If he says a policy is inhumane, it changes. If he says a wage is too low, it rises. If he says someone is being mistreated, they are fired. Are we clear?" The executives nodded, a chorus of bobbleheads. "Good," Darnell said, his voice deep and steady, filling the room. "Because we have a lot of work to do. I've spent 5 years cleaning up your trash. Now I'm going to clean up your mess." He started that day. He didn't start with spreadsheets. He started with the people. He went down to the basement, to the break room that smelled like mildew, and he held a meeting with the janitorial staff, the security guards, the cafeteria workers. When he walked in, they looked at him with suspicion, thinking he was a sellout, a suit. But then Darnell took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and sat on a folding chair. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me about the shifts. Tell me about the overtime they don't pay. Tell me about the disrespect." And they did. The floodgates opened. Stories of missed doctor appointments because they were afraid to ask for time off. Stories of sleeping in cars. Stories of being treated like furniture. Darnell took notes, pages and pages of them. But the real battle wasn't inside the building. It was outside. Richard Hartwell wasn't the kind of man who went quietly into the night. He was a man with connections and a bruised ego the size of a continent. A week into Darnell's new role, the smear campaign started. It began with a blog post on a financial gossip site, from mop bucket to boardroom. "Is Sterling Holdings losing its mind?" Then came the leaks, doctored photos from Darnell's youth, a speeding ticket from 10 years ago blown up into a history of reckless behavior, anonymous quotes claiming he was unqualified and unstable. It culminated on a Wednesday morning when Darnell arrived at work to find a group of reporters camped out on the plaza. As soon as they saw him, they swarmed. "Mr. Washington, is it true you have a criminal record? Did you manipulate Miss Sterling while she was vulnerable? Are you sleeping with the CEO?" The questions were like darts, tipped with poison. Darnell froze, the old instinct to hide, to disappear, rising up in his throat. He looked at the glass doors of the building, so close, yet so far. Then the doors opened. Victoria stepped out. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of a power suit. She was in a simple white dress, looking fierce and angelic all at once. She walked right into the swarm, parting the sea of cameras until she stood next to Darnell. She didn't speak to the reporters. She turned to him, head up. She whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong. Let them see you." She turned to the cameras, her face calm. "Since you are all so interested in Mr. Washington, let's give you the real story. This man saved my life when everyone else froze. He is cleaning up a company culture that I allowed to rot. And as for his past, he raised a daughter alone on minimum wage in a city that forgot him. That's not a scandal. That's a resume of resilience that none of you possess." She grabbed Darnell's hand right there in front of the cameras, interlacing her fingers with his, and they walked into the building together. That picture, the billionaire and the janitor holding hands against the world, was on the front page of every paper the next day. But the headline wasn't a scandal. It was the new face of leadership. 6 months later, Sterling Holdings was unrecognizable. The turnover rate had dropped to near zero. Productivity was up, but more importantly, the air in the building had changed. People smiled. They looked each other in the eye. Darnell was in his office, a real office with windows overlooking the river, reviewing a proposal for a subsidized daycare center he was building on the 2nd floor. When his assistant buzzed him, "Mr. Washington, Miss Sterling is here." Victoria walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee from the street vendor Darnell used to buy from the good stuff. "Sweet and strong. Coffee break," she said, setting the cup down. "I'm busy saving the world." "Boss," Darnell teased, leaning back in his chair. He looked different now, fuller in the face, the shadows under his eyes gone, a quiet confidence radiating from him. "The world can wait 10 minutes, she said, sitting on the edge of his desk. "I just got off the phone with the board. They approved the scholarship fund for employees' children. Fully funded." Darnell grinned, a smile that reached his eyes. "Jasmine is going to flip. She's already picking out colleges. She's 7. Victoria laughed, a sound that was becoming familiar in these halls. "She gets that ambition from her father." She looked at him, and the laughter faded into something softer, deeper. "You know, Darnell, that day in the hospital when you said you needed to be seen. I see you. I see you every day, and I like what I see." Darnell stood up, closing the distance between them. The professional lines had blurred a long time ago, replaced by a partnership forged in fire. "I see you too, Victoria," he said softly. "I see the woman who drove to the South Side in the middle of the night to save a nobody." "You were never a nobody," she whispered. He reached out and took her hand, the same way he had in the ambulance, the same way he had in front of the reporters. "So what's next for us? We fixed the company. We fixed the reputation. Now," Victoria said, looking out at the city that no longer felt like a cage of glass and steel, but a landscape of possibility. "Now we live. We go to Jasmine's piano recital tonight. We order pizza. We be happy. I think we've earned it." They stood there by the window, the janitor turned executive and the CEO who learned how to feel, watching the sun set over Chicago. Far below, the city moved on, but up here, everything had paused. They had rewritten the ending of their story. It wasn't a tragedy of injustice anymore. It was a testament to what happens when you refuse to let the world tell you who you are. Darnell squeezed her hand, thinking about the bruise on his back that had long since healed, thinking about the cold nights in the apartment that felt like a lifetime ago. He realized that courage wasn't just about saving a life in a boardroom. It was about waking up the next day, and the day after that, and choosing to believe that you mattered. So, here's the thing I want you to take away from Darnell and Victoria's story. We walk past people every single day. We see the uniforms, the name tags, the roles they play, but we rarely see the souls underneath. We rarely ask ourselves what kind of hero might be mopping the floor or serving the coffee. It shouldn't take a heart attack to wake us up to the humanity of the people around us. Darnell Washington was a hero long before he stepped into that boardroom. He was a hero every time he chose to be a good father despite the odds. Every time he chose dignity over despair. I want to know what you think. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever felt like your worth was being measured by your bank account instead of your character? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's make sure everyone gets seen today. And if this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and the power of doing the right thing, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs a reminder that they matter. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep your heart open. You never know who might be waiting to save your life.